about accommodations and the process for securing accommodations on testing. And we're actually going to talk a little bit more about success and things that you need to be thinking about if you have a student who has a learning disability, an intention issue, or any other something that needs some kind of an accommodation in the testing or in college. So we will start with this, and I'm going to take part one of this presentation. I always like to start with history and context because I get a little wonky with this kind of stuff. I won't read through this whole slide, but I will tell you that when I worked in college admissions in the 90s, we every once in a while would have an applicant come through who had a little star next to the testing, and that star indicated that the student took the SAT or the ACT with some kind of something, accommodation. We didn't know what it was, but we knew that there was some kind of accommodation. The reality is, though, that very, very few students sat for non-standard administration of a test back then. Very few. Until there was a lawsuit that actually was at the LSAT level, and after that, College Board and ACT eliminated the flagging of test scores. If you've paid attention to the news in the past 12 months, ACT has been in a little bit of trouble in terms of whether they're actually reporting or not. There is no asterisk. I think it has to do with test date reporting. So anyway, that's getting cleaned up too. But on the college side, they really don't know if a student has taken a test with any kind of accommodation or not. There have been some recent changes that are good to know about, because the trend was to become more and more and more strict about what needed, the documentation needed in order to support an accommodations request. Recently, though, a couple years ago, College Board took the lead in starting to relax the standards a little bit and give schools a little bit more discretion. So what they said is, if a student ever had a diagnosis, so they still needed to have a diagnosis of a learning disability. And I know that we like to talk about learning styles at McLean, but the reality is no one's going to give a student an accommodation after here for a learning style difference. It has to be a documented disability. That's just the reality. So College Board says, look, if the student has some kind of disability that's on the record from some time in life, and the school has a plan in place that allows the student to have accommodations in the classroom and on testing, that we will then follow the lead of the school in terms of the accommodations that you get. And so that helped us a lot in terms of getting more students through College Board. The key here is that there has to be some original disability, and the student has to use the accommodations in school. So just one second here. So the student has to use the accommodation. So if a student has ADHD and never ever sits for a test with extra time, it's difficult for us to then request it on the standardized test. Now, we all understand that school-based testing is very, very different from a high-stakes 3-hour exam. But point one is students should be encouraged to take advantage and utilize the accommodations that they're allowed to use in school. Question?
What is College Board?
I'm sorry, College Board is SAT, AP exams, PSAT.
Okay.
The other one is ACT, and that's just ACT.
So when you say that they were diagnosed at some point, do we have to validate that with the actual paperwork for the diagnosis?
Yes, we need to know that. So we need...
Well, you all have known that. Okay.
Right,
yeah.
so as long as in school we have a record
Yeah.
of an original diagnosis, but it might have been 6th grade, it might have been 4th grade. If the student has consistently had accommodations in the classroom from that time and is utilizing them today, then, and Ms. Hundle processes those, it makes it really super easy for her to process that request. Yeah.
If a student came here with an IEP, PIP from a public school because of a diagnosis of, let's say, hyperactivity disorder, and they've been in the regular school system here, does that count as having utilized those accommodations? Would those accommodations have normally flown into her class schedule for the last 2-3 years?
Yes, and we're getting a little bit ahead because we're talking right now only about SAT, and ACT is going to be different. But the answer to that basically is yes. If the student has that original diagnosis, an IEP, enter McLean with an IEP. Ms. Hundle can then create an academic achievement plan here from which she can request accommodations. One more question, then we're going to move on.
What defines a documented diagnosis?
I have something on that for you. Okay, so that's just a little bit. Here's the kicker though. ACT requires documentation. So we've been talking about College Board and answering your questions. So for PSAT in the junior year, for the SAT, and for AP exams, what I just said holds true. However, most students at McLean take the ACT, and we'll talk about why later. And the ACT requires documentation. And documentation for the ACT, which we'll get into, must be within 3 years of requesting. So if you don't want to do an updated psych ed, it means the student is going to be under the College Board world, is I guess the way to say that. Okay, let's change. So here are the essentials for documentation. So well-documented history. These are these 15, 16, 27-page psych ed reports. That's what that is. The ones that cost thousands of dollars, right? Yeah. So that is what a current psycho ed report is within 3 years of applying for accommodations. The key is age 16, and that's why we do this meeting in the sophomore year, because this is the year when most students are turning 16, is in the 10th grade year. Don't do it before that, because what we want to do is we want to have you do one last final psych ed update. We don't want you to have to do it again. And colleges, for accommodations at the college level, they are going to want to see a psych ed with adult scale testing from age 16 or later. So don't retest your 15-year-old. Wait till they're 16. And if you have a recent psych ed from age 14, then that's going to hold for ACT, and you can wait until the student's approaching college and then deal with it again. But it has, for ACT, it has to be current. And from that, we create an academic achievement plan that Ms. Hundle writes, and that's what documentation is. Okay.
Can I ask?
Yes.
I just to confirm my understanding here. So, if a student has an IEP that was done in 8th grade, then we can apply for the accommodations for the testing up until she takes the test.
Correct.
Okay, so
Right.
the reevaluation is, at that point, is more for college accommodations.
Correct. Right.
Thank you.
And we'll get into this too, but once you make that original request for accommodations, it holds. So 8th grade, as long as by 11th grade we're requesting the accommodations, but they still hold through senior year for any additional testing. Just so you know, it's easy to get the information, and specifically in terms of the documentation guidelines from College Board at ACT. Here's the sequence of testing that we do at McLean School. So in 10th grade, we do the PSAT for students, and we also do the pre-SAT, and you should have score reports back on both of those tests at this point. We like to do both of those, not because it's super fun for students. I call it an American rite of passage, and it's like nobody likes standardized testing except for the few, like I'm sorry if I offend you, but there are some people who like testing, so if you're one of those people, I think it's awful. It's my least favorite part of this whole thing, even though we talk about it a lot. So PSAT and ACT, pre-ACT in 10th grade, and we do those to get some kind of a baseline. So the PSAT in 10th grade, we did not request accommodations for students on that PSAT because we wanted, A, we don't want to consume an entire school day. B, 10th graders are like, really, I have to do this? And then making them sit for 5 hours? No. So we just do that to give them exposure to what this test is and to get some kind of a baseline. And also for us, it gives us an idea of how much of the test did the student really get through? Because one of the determinations is it time and a half? Is it 100%? Is it double time? Is it really not a time issue but a breaks issue? So there are different kinds of accommodations that we can request, and this helps us kind of tease out what it is with a student. So in 11th grade, there is no pre-ACT anymore. Students do the PSAT in October. It's the national test date. Every school's taking it at the same time. And from there, we work with families to figure out what to do next. So we register for students for PSAT and pre-ACT, but after that, families are actually registering for these tests themselves. SAT subject tests, very, very few students take SAT subject tests, and every year Fewer and fewer colleges require them. I mean, we're basically down to the military academies and the UC system, and a couple of other stragglers at this point that actually require subject tests. So it's a non-issue for a lot of students. This is a topic, I guess, for a conversation later about whether a student should do it individually. And AP exams, they do that in either the junior or senior year, at the end of the AP class. And then in 12th grade, some students in the fall will take an additional group of tests if they need them. Okay. All right, so let's deal with SAT and College Board first, because actually the types of accommodations between these two tests can be very, very different. So a student who needs time and a half to take an SAT, and that's all that they need, will register with College Board, get the accommodations approval, and will go to a test center on a national test date and take the SAT in a room with other students with 50% extended time. That's how that works. 100% extended time bumps the student to school-based administration. We have a 3-day window to get the student through, and it's divided into 2 days. So it's 2 really, really long days of testing. Extra breaks is an accommodation that can be helpful for some students. There are not a lot of breaks in this test. Whenever a student has 100%, or even 50%, I oftentimes, particularly if there's any attention issue, we want to request extra breaks. Otherwise, you're sitting for 5 hours with a couple of 5 or 10 minute breaks. It's really, really grueling. There's no lunch break. Assistive technology is available. So recorded for students who are dyslexic, for example, large print test books for students who have difficulty with the small print. Also large block answer sheets for students who want to get away from the bubbles. That's an accommodation. It has to be not just want to get away, can't do the bubbles, right? Or marking directly in the test book, which is no bubble sheet. The difference between these two, I will tell you, if the student can't deal with the bubbles, but is able to deal with, it's pretty large, putting an X in a block and keeping track and not making a mistake, I would default to that, because the reality is that this is human. One of us has to transfer the answers. Now, we're pretty good at that, but it is still human versus the student doing it. Use of computer is for the essay. It is for just a keyboard. Grammar functions off, obviously internet is off, and it's really just for students who have difficulty writing, and it's typically for our students who have dysgraphia, and that's it. And calculator. The SAT has one section in it that is no calculator. And there are some students, because of a math, it has to be a documented math disability, those students can have approval for a calculator on the entire math section of the SAT. And then, so this is just this little note. If there is a thing that's just math extra time, but if a student has extra time in reading, then the entire test becomes extra time. Okay, so that's the SAT. Yes, question on the SAT?
May I ask how the extended time works? Because I know when my child took the entrance exam for the private schools, we requested extra time, but it backfired because the way they did it was they gave him extra time at the end of each section, and he could not move on until that
That's
time
correct.
ran out.
That's correct.
And so it ended up being worse for a child with ADHD.
Right, absolutely.
Is that how it works?
Yes, it is. Each section is 50%. Each section is 100%. Yeah,
So
you're
that's not
making a
helpful.
very good point. You're right. So we can talk about something else that can be helpful for ADHD students in a minute. The ACT is very similar to all of the things that I just said. And the ACT used to be self-paced, and they just changed it. So it's section by section now for extended time.
That's not
And the test centers. So multiple day testing at school. This is a key, well, and the triple time, but the multiple day testing at school is a key, really important differentiator between the SAT and the ACT, particularly for students with attention issues. Because what that means is that the student comes in and takes the English section with extra time or not. It could be a standard administration. It could be just regular time, but multiple days. And then they're done and they walk away. We have a 3-week window, not 3 days, 3 weeks, So depending on what's going on here and the time of year, we might do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday if they do the essay. Or we might do Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday. So that's key, to be able to do just one section at a time. Students with ADHD, I mean, anybody with attention issues, that's extremely helpful. You want to make sure that it is highlighted in the psych ed that the student needs multiple day testing, because the ACT folks are reading the psych ed reports.
Is that only for ADHD, or what about anxiety?
Anxiety too, absolutely, anxiety too. Yep. Just needs to be in the report, that's all, under the recommendations, yes.
Do you have, let's say, a checklist that we can provide to our tester so that lays out in the type of accommodations that the school thinks are helpful and that they should specifically consider in the report?
That's a good question. I mean, in the academic achievement plan, that's after the testing report.
But if you had it up front, it would be a lot easier to go in.
Yeah, that's actually a good suggestion. It's different for everybody. Josephine, yes.
The teachers actually fill out checklists, so Karen's been able to do, if students don't have psycho eds or we need to update it, there are student achievement plans already set up that Karen has done, and she uses teacher inputs on that as well. So teachers are making observations on what kinds of accommodations students are using in class, and that goes into the checklist too. So you can ask Karen for sort of what we've observed so far, and that could be something you can take. Obviously, with multiple day testing, you do want that specificity in the document.
And I have shared our checklists of accommodations that students have been using with testers when students have gone in for retesting.
Also, there are forms that the teachers have to complete before the student goes to testing that never go back to you. They go directly from us to the tester that say what the student uses and what's helpful for the student. So we attach that. So.
But the one thing is that multi-day testing, because that's not really relevant to what they do at school, is something that I would just mention to when you go in to say, like, this is something that we've been told might be useful. You know, if you know that your child could have has a diagnosis of attention or anxiety issues, or really, struggles to maintain focus.
So that's the only outlier from that list that we have that goes to the testers.
And mechanically, when should one get this before setting up, let's say your child's already over 16, you have an appointment scheduled, let's say in 2 months. When do I come to the school to get this paperwork so I have it for my testing?
The tester sends, we get reports, we get stuff from them to complete and send back to them.
Okay, so they're gonna-
Always.
Yeah, and
right?
we have that.
Yeah, we have that here.
That's slides, Jason.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. And then the other thing that's different is that there's something called triple time. And so when students have audio, just because it's so much slower to listen than to read, students who are approved for an audio version of the test automatically get triple time with ACT. And oftentimes it's can't promise you this, but it's oftentimes one-on-one because very few students actually get this. So sometimes it's just a student and a proctor. Okay. Computer use. With the ACT, fewer students get this. Again, it really is for students who have dysgraphia. Again, the grammar functions are off. The one thing I'll say is I am surprised at the growing number of students who are getting this accommodation. I've done a few recently. It's like, they want it, let's see what happens, and they're getting approved. Not all, I can't promise though, right? But if we think that the computer use is going to be important, then we can put it in as a request and see.
How much writing is actually involved? I thought it was mostly reading and bubbles.
That's a great question. This is only for the essay, which the UC system and the
Is optional.
military academies
Okay,
need, right?
gotcha.
So most
That's what
students
I
are not
thought.
doing this
Okay.
essay anyway, so it
Yeah.
becomes not a
an
big
issue.
deal.
All
Yep.
right. Yep.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I thought the ACT had a separate writing section.
Both do.
Both do.
And it's optional.
Yeah.
And so not nobody, but so few schools either require it. There are a whole bunch that say they recommend it.
Yeah.
But it's the most subjective. It's read by people, and the grading is kind of wonky on it. It's really hard to do well because all the readers have to give anyway, so that the very few schools are using the essay section.
And I personally would think that if unless somebody's going into a writing, a field that, or planning to study something that really emphasizes English and that type, that maybe it would be less valuable.
No, the
Yeah.
reason it's not valuable is because it's very subjective in its scoring, and also it's writing that you don't do in college.
Okay.
So you never sit down in college and have a prompt, right, that you've never discussed or thought about. That's what this is.
So do you recommend that they don't do it?
Yes. So you'll get, if your student should do it as the list is developing, you'll know.
Yeah.
But it's so few schools. Okay, so test center, the test centers, which is that national test aid, it's a big public school, you go in and you take your test. They can manage standard administration, 50% extended time, again, at ACT, if it's straight up 50% extended time, you go into a test center. And then certain things like marking the answers in the test book or the large block, those kinds of things, that can all happen at a test center. But, next slide. Anything else with ACT gets bumped to school-based testing, which is why we do a lot of school-based testing here. So 50%, anything beyond, so our double time, our triple time students, they're all here, and then we also, audio version of the test is always here. The computer, actually for both of them, is always here. And then multiple day testing. The SAT, it's 100%, again, it's 2 days, and with ACT, it can be the one section per day. Okay. And this gets to your point about extended time can make it a really long testing day for students. And there are some students that actually don't need time. What they need is just to deal with one thing at a time. Or they need extra breaks or break after every section. So a lot of people think that extra time becomes this, oh, extra time and the scores are gonna go up and it's gonna be great. But it's not necessarily productive for all students to have extra time if that's not what they really need. So one of the things to sort out is what's really gonna be helpful. Is it the time, or is it a student who actually, I mean, there are ADHD students who are fast, they just can't focus for a long time. So that's what that's about. And then we have Ms. Hundela.
Hi.
Okay,
So the accommodations request process, and this can get a little bit complicated, so we will walk you through this now and then remind you of it as we need to throughout the next year as well. So the very first thing we need is actually, and I think we gave you consent forms as well, or consent forms, just because we will have to send documentation both to College Board and ACT, and that includes the psych ed and the academic achievement plan too. So we do need to have your permission to send that, since those do belong to you. The neuropsych testing belongs to you, so we need to have your permission to send that to ACT and College Board. And as soon as we have that on file, then we can go ahead and start the process when you request that process be started. And then, of course, as we mentioned, if it's needed, then go ahead and start the process of updating your documentation, or starting to get the documentation if you need it. There is a turnaround time for teacher reports. So if you're planning on doing this over the summer, and many families do, since they don't want to necessarily disrupt the school time, just make sure that you give some time for teachers to get the forms back, because it does take us time to get the forms to the teachers to get them back. If you're doing it over the summer, make sure that you get the forms from the teachers before May 16th, because they will need time to process it and get it back, since they can go far and wide during the summer break. These psych eds can carry through the college, so you want to make sure that you get that done, as Ms. Serpa said, after either on 16th birthday, although that might not be the way they want to celebrate their 16th birthday, so maybe after, so that can carry through to college. Yes?
All forms should go to Ms. Hundel. So you're gonna get the forms from the testers if you're updating testing. We'll go to Ms. Hundel, so make sure that she gets them. And usually what we do, we give one set of forms to an English or literature teacher, and the other set to a math teacher. So there's that distinction between right brain and left brain.
And that also is a really good time if the tester would like to have the checklist that we give to all of the teachers and the checklist we keep that keeps track of any previous recommendations for accommodations, as well as we do track all of the accommodations that students are using. And right now with the 10th grade, what I've been doing is meeting with the 10th grade advisories and having the students look over the accommodations that they've been using in their classes. Sometimes they're not aware of what they're using, of what is actually an accommodation. Like they're not aware that they've been using extra time. So we really do try to build that into the class itself so that they're not, feeling like self-conscious that they use extra time. Or the fact that using a computer on a test is considered an accommodation. That wouldn't be something that in a college classroom they could just, pull out a computer during the exam and start using that. So I'd like for them to start becoming aware as they're in 10th and certainly in 11th grade of what they've been using that would be considered an accommodation, so that when they go into an AP class and then into a college classroom, they are knowing what really works for them that would be considered an accommodation, so that they can continue that if it's valuable for them in college and know how to continue that or know how to carry that forward into college. And also, hopefully bring those papers back to you so that you can see if they've been using something, if that accommodation is really valuable, and if that would be something you can use on SAT or ACT testing. Did you have a question?
Yeah, 2 questions now. So about this, the kids seeing the accommodations, have they seen them already? And can we see these lists now so we can kind of start to focus on this?
About half of the 10th graders have. We got a little bit slowed down by all of the snow days and the weather. So about half of them have. Some of them chose not to bring those home. So if you want to see them, I'll be done meeting with all of the 10th grade by the end of the month. So if you haven't brought them home by the end of the month, you can go ahead and email me and I can send it to you. Because sometimes they're like, oh, okay. And then, hand it back to me and go, all right, that means nothing to me. And as far as the students who have the checklist of accommodations they've used, those are generated at the end of the school year. So if you have a student who's new this year, they won't have anything tracking what they've used at school year unless they use something during the previous semester's exam. Does that make sense?
Okay, so I still have a second
That's
question.
fine.
You say before August 1st. Okay, so my child has a late birthday, is not 16 until beginning of July. Is this gonna be a problem getting the testing, the report in time?
If it's for the PSATs and he's already been using the accommodations at school and has a previous diagnosis, the College Board is a little bit more lenient about that, so,
Yeah, I
that's
can say
something.
my son, who's a junior here, has a birthday at the end of July, and it worked out totally fine. And I would just say, when you're meeting with the tester, say up front, we're hoping to get accommodations in place for the PSAT. Do you think you can make that happen? And they should be able to make that happen.
And you can also just email me too. Like as I said, if you have a diagnosis already here, and we've been tracking accommodations through the years, College Board is not quite as strict as ACT.
The one other thing I would add is that if you are retesting after a very, very long time, sometimes the recommended accommodations change. So Ms. Hundle can, over the summer, request PSAT accommodations for the student based on what we have, if we're concerned that the report's not going to get here in time. And then the other thing is, you could ask the tester to send, even before the full report is done, say, can you at least send the recommendations to Ms. Hundle, just a one little thing, even like an email, before the entire report is released, because that way she can at least use the recommendations that are going to be in the report. Again, that's assuming we have a documentation before. In the case of some students turning 16 really late, which we've run into also, we can make that initial request and then we can do an appeal for more later.
So for things like a young person with, who struggles to sit still for long periods, and they might get up and walk around the classroom or go get a drink at the water fountain, that's not something that's usually going to be documented as an accommodation in the classroom, right?
The teachers will document that sometimes as extra breaks. So they do actually
Okay,
document,
okay.
like watch the students pretty carefully, and if a student is taking extra breaks during a test because they need to get up and move around, they do document that.
Okay.
Sometimes it won't strike them as being extraordinary just because many of our students do that.
That's
but
right.
They,
Okay.
But they usually will mark the extra breaks. Yes, I'll take one more and then we'll go on. Yes?
So it sounds like you're meeting individually with all the students, explaining what accommodations that they've been receiving? Is that what I heard?
I've been meeting with the advisories, so smaller groups. They're not seeing each other's testing, they're just seeing what they've been using. And I've been talking about what accommodations are, how sometimes they're not sometimes the things that they just use as part of a typical testing situation at McLean actually are considered accommodations if you were in a typical classroom or in the college. And just to make them aware of it, and to talk a little bit about how that might transition to standardized testing, because I think a lot of students aren't aware that the accommodations don't just show up on a standardized test, and how that might carry that through to college too. Because I think in sophomore year they start to think a little bit more about maybe using accommodations isn't such a bad thing, and they might want to continue that to college. Yes.
See, my son just had the psych ed testing a year ago, but it sounds like it's necessary for him to do it again real soon. He turned 16 in 2 weeks. So am I correct with that?
Well, I
No.
think for the accommodations of College Board and ACT, correct me if I'm wrong, Hannah, you should be fine.
Yes.
It's for college that it's gonna be the issue.
Right.
So you just have to make sure he gets, if he needs accommodations in college, he needs to get retested at some point before graduation.
Got it.
The one thing I also, sorry, that I would say about for the college side, was he 15 when he was tested?
I believe it was real close.
It was real close?
I don't remember if it was 40 or 50.
So
Right around.
before, because these reports are so expensive, right? It's thousands of dollars to do this. Through the college search, and this is just something you're going to have to do, as your son is researching colleges, you should call the disability office. They do not talk to the admissions office. Those are two separate operations. Americans with Disabilities, they can't share that information. And say, this is the documentation we have. Would we need to update should he attend your school? Because it's possible that you would get some super friendly, flexible office somewhere. So that the rule about 16 is a very general rule, but there could be individual exceptions to that. So I would make that a point of research.
Got it. Thank you.
And the only caveat to that, I would say, just is if he's considering a program that, or considering going beyond that to, say, take standardized testing in college to go beyond. So if that's not something he would be thinking about, like taking the
LSAT, but then you could test that.
Right,
yeah.
then you could do it beyond that, but so that could be consideration later. Okay. The next step would be that I update, when I get the new testing in, updating the academic achievement plan based on the new psychoed report. I also update anything that goes within the school so that the teachers are aware of any updated recommendations. And then for the College Board, I complete an online request for accommodations. And this carries through for all of the College Board tests too. We just need to do that once. As Hannah mentioned, the new College Board policy is if they've been using the accommodations in school, it kind of has made the approval process a little bit easier. It's also made it necessary for me to kind of remind the kids that they need to be using these accommodations on testing in school too. And we do track that. I do have the teachers let me know what the kids are using, and they've been
But
pretty
it's
good
so
about it.
different when you do testing in school because they're very brief compared to the SATs, so there's really no comparison.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons we are really, we keep on the end of the year exam, or the end of the semester exams, because those are higher stakes tests. They're longer, they require more preparation, and we track them carefully for accommodations. And the kids are pretty good about, especially as they move up into their sophomore year and junior year, about really letting us know, being proactive about letting us know what they need for accommodations. So, We track those, we keep track of what they use, and, you know, they can shift a little bit through the years, but, you know, if they use it in freshman year and then use it again in junior year, we have a record of that. Then when the students take their October PSATs, they take them, if they have the accommodations in place, they take them with the accommodation. And of course, the college counselors can help make recommendations on whether or not they're going to be taking the ACT versus the SAT, having those PSAT scores coming in. A second set of PSAT scores and some accommodations can give a little bit better indication about which test they were going to take. And also when, because the students taking Algebra 2 or higher might be candidates for fall junior year testing. But that would be based on recommendation of college counselors. Yes.
So let's say you know your child's gonna take the ACT. Do they have to take the PSAT in October? Or is it like just a good practice to take another standardized test?
I
or?
think it's a good practice to take another standardized test. You know, sitting in through the testing process, and they can take it without the accommodations if they want to, just to sort of take, you know, they don't have to take the extra time. But sitting and taking another long standardized test, it can be really good practice for that kind of testing. Once approved, and this is definitely a different process than the ACT, they get an SSD number, and that number they can use to register for SAT and the subject tests. And you will need to register them, or your child will need to register themselves. And you have to register for each test. So we can't do that. We register for the PSATs, but we can't register them for SATs. We can register for the APs. That's what we can do that, but you have to be in charge of the SATs. For the ACTs, it's a very different process. Because it's just the one test, what you do is register your child for whatever, whichever date you would like, and then indicate that you would like to apply for accommodations, and that goes then to me, and I finish the process. You can send the email with the ACT ID to me, and that sort of also signals that I need to do something there. I finish the process with all of the paperwork that I have. And if, again, the list that we had of the accommodations that would bump your student to McLean ACT administration, and we do that here. If not, then that would be at a test center. If you're not approved, you would need to you can appeal, but you need new information. Generally, nationally, ACT denies about 25% of requests, and College Board about 20% of requests, but we get very few accommodation request denials. So.
Good morning. So when I was learning to drive, I would ask my dad for directions. Dad, how do I get to Georgetown? All my buddies are gonna go there. And he would say, oh, it's easy, just keep the river on your right, keep the monument there, and that you got it. And to me, it just sounded like pots and pans banging. I didn't get it. And I'm imagining for some of you right now, this is all sounding like pots and pans banging together, and it'd be very, very overwhelming. The good news is, you've got us to help you through the process. You're not expected to absorb all of this today, get it all today. Follow-up questions are completely welcome. And the other thing is, we break the process into manageable, age-appropriate steps, right? We're not talking today, we don't have college reps here talking at you about what's important. We're starting with what you need to be focused on right now. And you'll have presentations throughout your whole time here at McLean. So I just want you to kind of do the mindfulness moment thing and think about it. We got this, we got you, and we'll all get through it together, okay? It is a lot, but it's not reinventing the wheel for us. So you've got people guiding you through the process. Okay, so starting early is what we're doing by being here today. Ready? Thank you. So what should your students be focused on? Grades, clearly, building the transcript. On that note, colleges recognize that as freshmen, students are coming into high school, they are worried about where's my locker, did I bring my lunch, right? They're not worried about, do I have a C in that math class, and, you know, should I bother go seeing the teacher? Colleges get that. So what they're looking for is an upward trend. Freshman year can be a bit of a hot mess. We can just say that. It does count. I don't want to mislead you. It does go into the cumulative GPA. But as long as they're moving towards an upward direction, the expectation is that by junior year, the student should be cooking with gas, okay? That doesn't mean all A's. It doesn't mean all honors and AP courses. It means they're stretching where appropriate. Maybe they're strong in math, so they're going to elevate in math, but maybe English is not their thing, so they might be on level or just following what's recommended there. Okay, so the expectation is sophomore year, start building that transcript towards the upward trend. We want them to get involved. We want them to get involved with things that they're interested in, okay? Don't make your cherub start the oboe because you heard at a cocktail party that there's a shortage of oboe in college, okay? Let them do what they like, but do encourage them to get involved. And you're probably thinking, I can't even encourage my kid to do his or her teeth in the morning. How am I going to do all this? The good news is we are doing that here at McLean as well, okay? Advisors are checking in, teachers are checking in. Why aren't you doing the musical? Hey, you're really good at that. Why aren't you trying that? So there's a lot of encouragement happening here too. Because the colleges want to know, what are they doing besides working in the classroom? When they get to campus, the colleges want the students to take on student government. They want them to play that oboe. They want them to do French club or different kinds of events. So they want to see that they can do that now. Developing a skill set for academic success. All of these skills, self-advocacy, right? Learning to go to the teacher and say, I don't get it. Can you run that by me one more time? Understanding learning profile. How do I learn? What is my learning style? What do I need in order to be successful? Study skills, what works for me. I'm not throwing Miss Hundle under the bus. I'm inviting you to reach out to her at some point, and the students do. They know that Miss Hundle knows how to work with them. If a class isn't going well, what should I be doing in that class? Resilience and perseverance. That's a big deal. That's a hard one, right? It's hard because when we see our kids getting knocked down or needing help, we want to just do it for them, right? Maybe you're a hover mother. Maybe you're a new term I've heard about, a smother mother, okay? You might think I'm a smother mother because I work here and my kid goes here, but it's not about me today, okay? So resilience and perseverance are tough ones, but it will come. And then independence, right? The ultimate goal is for them to move on. We might not want to think about that, or maybe you do at this point, but it's for them to get the skill set here. And again, the great news about McLean is this is happening every day in the classroom. It's the beauty of the choice you made to send your kid to a small school, okay? Everybody knows your student, everybody knows how he or her learns, and they have the same goal, move the student forward to a path of success. And then college outcomes. There's a lot of scary statistics out there. You can really go down that rabbit hole if you really want to, okay? So here's some statistics about college graduation rates. And the great news here is that we know what we're doing. Does that sound obnoxious? Yes, it does sound obnoxious, but I'm going to say it. We know what we're doing. We know how to work with the students to find fit. We listen to the student, we listen to you, and we try to find the happy medium between what the parent thinks is best for the student, what the student thinks is best, and you'd be surprised there is common ground. We're right now meeting with juniors in family meetings, and it's amazing what comes out in those meetings. I had a father say the other day, I had no idea you thought that. And the kid's like, what do you think I've been doing all this time, Dad? You know, like it was just a basic moment of kind of coming together, which is neat. So we're all about fit here. We're all about finding what college is going to be the best fit. We're not necessarily going for name. We don't have any agenda like we want to say McLean places X school, X kids in this kind of school. We want your student to get into the best college so that they get out of that college and go on and fly to be successful, okay? All right, so I think at this point, I want to just mention before we open the questions what you can be doing now as sophomores, right? What could you do now? Because to me, the best antidote for stress is action. When you're thinking about, oh my gosh, the college process is starting, what can I do? There's some action steps you can do. You could do some casual college visits. For example, If spring break, you happen to be in Florida, and there's a campus nearby, maybe you do a drive-by. Maybe you do an official tour, maybe you don't, but just seeing different campuses as they naturally pop up is a great opening step for students, okay? If your student, I would take the cue from your student too, if your student is really ready to go, all right, let's take the metro down to GW and see what an urban campus looks like. There's very few trees, it's kind of in the city. Do you love that? Are you energized by that? Or are you overwhelmed by it, all right? Or maybe you go look at St. Mary's on the Eastern Shore, if you are lucky enough to be heading to the beach. That has a beautiful lake, and there's a Target and an Applebee's. Is that enough for you, or is that idyllic situation, or do you need more action? So you could start with baby steps on little casual visits. And the other thing I would encourage your sophomores to do is think about something productive for the summer. We do want them to relax, okay? I just want to say that first. We do want them to have downtime and relax, but something productive. What do I mean by productive? It can be a job. It can be community service, because we need that too to graduate, right? It can be a program. Let's say they think they want to do engineering. Maybe they could do an engineering program at University of Maryland, or shadow a family friend who's an engineer. Anything productive that allows them to explore a little bit, again, something they're interested in. You'll receive an email from us inviting you to a mock admissions night, which is going to be on April 13th at 6:30 in the evening. And that night is a great opportunity for you and your students to come. We will have 5 representatives, college reps from all different types of colleges here, working with fake applications to show you this is how we do it at University of Pittsburgh. This is how we do it at Ohio Wesleyan. So you get an idea of what the colleges are looking for. It can be a very, very healthy and helpful, informative evening. And lastly, you will also get an email from us inviting you to a few college fairs this spring. The WACE, Washington Area Independent Schools Fair, is April 10th, and there's a Jesuit Fair, I believe it's February 28th, but we will send out an email about that. If it's too soon for your students, that's fine. If it's not too soon for you, you can go by yourself, whatever you'd like to do, okay? Any questions on these pieces before? Yeah.
Mention the College Resource Board.
College Resource Board, okay, great point. So we do have a wonderful zone of resources, the Resource Board on the McLean website. If you go there, there'll be information, anything from testing to visits that we've done. We post pictures of colleges we've gone to. What else is on the Resource Board?
There's a whole summer opportunities.
Summer opportunities,
These
yes,
presentations
you can watch this
are there.
presentation all over again. That's amazing, right? Okay, yes, question.
No, about the dates that you mentioned in Athens, is February 15th,
April 10th is going to be the Washington Area College Fair, Independent Schools College Fair, and then April 17th will be the mock admissions.
Oh, you said
13.
I'm sorry, I want to give you a challenge. this
Which one?
17th.
Oh,
Don't
okay.
come on the
17th 's
13th,
better.
yeah. But we will send that out in an email too, okay? Yes?